Lights on. Good afternoon. I would like to officially call the budget special meeting workshop to order. Could I get a roll call, please?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Dollison?
Here.
Commissioner Mercer?
Here.
Commissioner Dantzler?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Yates?
Here.
And Mayor Birdsong.
Here. Where's Chief? Oh, there he is. I'm looking around for you and I
was
didn't
coming
see
in the
you.
building and I see you.
All right.
I was going to take the evening off, but. So, Mayor Pro Tem, Commissioners, audience members, it is a great pleasure this evening to present to you our budget proposal for fiscal year 24-25. I believe at your dais you have a copy of the slide deck. You should also have a copy of the tentative budget, which will give you the infinite detail into every cost center, every line, every revenue, everything that makes up our budget. So what I'm going to do for the next short period of time is go through the budget presentation. I've had the pleasure of meeting with each of you individually over the past, I'd say 45 days to give you an update of where we are on the process. How all those things have shaken out is what you'll get this evening. As well as some additional information that we've gleaned through the process. And then as part of your budget, or sorry, as part of your workshop for this evening, and also for your City Commission meeting on Monday, there will be an item on the budget or on the agenda that speaks to the trim notice. So that's when we have to designate what our maximum millage rate will be and also set our budget date. So hence the reason for this presentation this evening. So again, our budget is built around our 6 strategic pillars that we've talked so much about. Those that appear on your screen: the quality of life, community safety, infrastructure, responsible government, environmental stewardship, and economic stability, sustainability. So again, everything that the city of Winter Haven does fits neatly either within one or multiple of these strategic pillars. So when we start talking about the services we provide, we don't talk about what department does what. It's about what do we accomplish within these strategic pillars. From our side, we need to budget accordingly by department, and that's what we've done in what we're going to present this evening. But everything is gained or geared back towards these specific strategic pillars. Some of the budget highlights for fiscal year 25, we do have a balanced budget, which we are required by law to present a balanced budget and adopt a balanced budget. We are not like the federal government. We cannot do deficit spending. We can also not borrow money to pay off debt or pay off shortfalls within operating expenses. Certainly we can for capital projects, but you cannot balance a budget with bond proceeds or borrowing. Your budget is balanced based upon an ad valorem millage rate of 6.59 mils. This is the same millage that is in place today. The total budget for fiscal year 25 is $296,223,539. In comparison, the fiscal year 24 budget was $260 million. So we see an increase of about $36 million. Almost every penny of that and then some is going to be tied back to capital projects and one-time expenses. A lot of that within the utilities operations and some of the major projects that we have going on in Parks and Recreation at present time. Gross taxable values for Winter Haven, the incorporated area increased 11.3%, up to $4.75 billion for the period. This is tied to new growth within the area, so when you think about some of the big multifamily properties that have come online, a lot of single-family residential permits that have come online, as well as reevaluation and upgrades and valuation of existing properties. The ad valorem revenues This is a result of that increase in property tax value. Your ad valorem revenues also increased by about $2.7 million for the year ahead, bringing your total ad valorem revenue to just shy of $28 million. The proceeds ad valorem-wise within the CRAs total $3.6 million for the downtown district and almost $1.3 million for the Florence Villa district. Combined, those result in an increase of about $666,000 over the prior fiscal year. I'll talk about the CRAs in just a little bit, but they did meet this week and have gone over their budget recommendations, and that will be coming back to you as a CRA board, but that will also be noted further in my presentation. The budget continues to include an allocation from the general fund to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to the tune of $250,000 to help with our efforts to mitigate affordable housing challenges. You may recall that this year you just recently went through some commission agenda items that pertain to local commitment guarantees, or local match commitments for a Blue Sky project that was $465,000. That is out on the southwest side of Winter Haven, and then also the Winter Haven Housing Authority for their Lucerne Park Road project. That was a commitment of $1 million. Both of those are subject to those projects being recognized and recommended by the Florida Housing Financing Corporation. The budget includes a 2.5% step for our employees. It's part of the STEP plan that was adopted in 2021. Again, that allows our employees to gradually move through the pay grade and recognizes that when you have greater experience, you gain more skills, more knowledge base in that role, and there's a greater benefit to the organization and to the citizens we serve. I'm going to talk in a little bit about the cost of living adjustment that we've included as a recommendation to help address economic hardships that our employees face, overall affordability in comparison of wages earned to actual cost of living, as well as in hopes of advancing our efforts for retention and recruitment. In terms of number of positions, the budget is built around a total of 736 positions, of which 106 of those are part-time. New positions that are added to the budget for next year include a total of 29 full-time and 24 part-time positions. Within the general fund, which is where we most often focus our attention because that's really what is funded through taxpayer dollars, there's a total of 12 new positions that are full-time and 20 that are part-time. And part of that effort to use more part-time gives us greater flexibility, and it actually costs us less at the end of the day. A lot of folks out there are looking for part-time work that are retirees and may want to work in parks and recreation or some other area that we have, but don't necessarily want to commit to a full-time job. So that's a strategy that not only the city is looking at, but also I know the school board is looking heavily at that as one of their strategies. I will also say that when we get into the new positions, you'll hear that of those 12 new positions, 7 of those are within the police department alone. Looking at millage rates, I mentioned that our budget is balanced on our current millage rate of 6.59 mils. The table you see on the screen reflects what we know as of today in terms of what the other 18 taxing jurisdictions within Polk County are looking to do going forward. I will say that the notation there for Lakeland, that is based upon media reports that we received this week of something that they're contemplating. Where that lands, I don't really know, but you can see that that's a little over a $0.5 mil increase is what was proposed there. Everybody else appears to be holding the line on millage, with the exception of Polk City is, to our knowledge, contemplating a $0.5 mil reduction in their ad valorem millage rate. We'll continue to update this and be mindful of it, and I will talk a little bit more about that momentarily. The budget includes funding for 3 different groups of partners that we have. So Polk Vision, Main Street, Winter Haven, Chamber of Commerce, and the Economic Development Council are all included as community partners. Those are agencies that help us fulfill the mission that the city of Winter Haven has. I will note that Main Street, Winter Haven, you see $20,000 is noted there. There's also $45,000 in grant and aid that goes to the Main Street, Winter Haven program that is housed within the downtown CRA project. budget. The service delivery partners, those are folks that help us actually deliver services consistent with what we do. So Keep Winter Haven Clean and Beautiful, as you know, works closely with us on litter control, environmental cleanups around the lakes. The Marching Wolverines Band, that is an outreach program that is housed within the Winter Haven Recreation and Cultural Center for youth to help them with, again, an experience in arts and culture. And then Ridge Art Association, which is housed within the Chain of Lakes Complex or the Advent Health Fieldhouse and Conference Center, the $12,000 annual contribution for them. Those funds are all held within the respective departments, as you see in parentheses there. And then in the external contracted services, Winter Haven Area Mass Transit and Lakeland Area Mass Transit District, that is the WHAT system. The $293,825, that is for your annual cost associated with fixed route transit. So that is the buses that you see running about town that are housed right across the street at the WHAT terminal. That is the same amount that we pay in the current year. It is expected to stay that amount next year and also in 2026. I will note that the CRAs are both exploring options for microtransit to bring small golf cart style transit systems into the downtown and also within Florence Villa to move people on shorter distances to, again, just help people get from point A to point B without necessarily having to walk or deal with climate change in the heat that we're dealing with or rain. Also helps us with some of our parking issues that people speak to downtown. There's also $295,000 that is tied to Heart for Winter Haven. This is based upon expanded services that they are doing, tied with some rental assistance in Bridge Gap voucher program. This aligns with what they presented to you on June 10th of this year, as you may recall. Funding for nonprofit organizations, the budget includes $318,646 for nonprofits. This does reflect some additional agencies that you considered for funding at a recent meeting to include an additional amount funded for the Meals on Wheels program. You'll see it third from the bottom in that center column. Overall, there are 40 agencies that are funded this year. That is an increase of 7 over last year. The Grant and Aid Committee will be meeting this fall. They're going to reevaluate some of the application protocols within there, and hopefully that will help us overcome some of the challenges that were experienced by some of the applicants this year. Total of all revenues within the budget. So this is all the money coming in, not to include our cash carry forwards, is $217,943,502. So roughly $218 million in revenue coming in. You can see the greatest amount of that is within the utility fund, followed by the general fund, followed by solid waste, although that is a distant third compared to the first two. When we look at the how the expenditures are made based upon all types, one thing I'll point out here, you see that the total expenditure is $296.2 million. If I back up, 218 to 296, that doesn't appear to be a balanced budget. Again, that difference between what is expended and what is recognized as revenue, that bridge is covered by what is cash carry forward of projects that are in the queue and funded that can be tied to grants that are yet to be reimbursed and debt service or bond proceeds that we have for projects that hasn't been expended yet that is held as cash carry forward. When we look at the expenditures on a system-wide basis, you're investing $133 million in capital for your community. That is within your utility systems, within your roadway projects, within your arts and culture programs and facilities. That's a significant investment. Over 45% of the total budget is going into either infrastructure expansion, renewal, or replacement. It's about 60 million or 20% thereabout is going towards personnel services and just shy of 19% towards operating services. In looking at the expenditure of by all types, some things that come up with as expenditures, you'll see within the general fund, There is an expenditure that is tied to funds going out from the general fund to support other operations. So the general fund provides direct support to the library, to the cemetery, and to the airport as an example. There will also be expenditures within utilities and within solid waste that are dividend proceeds or transfers that are coming into the general fund. So there is money that is transferred from those two, shows up as an expense for them, but will track as a revenue within the general fund. The general fund itself is funded at $72.3 million. The biggest source of revenue within the general fund is ad valorem taxes, almost 28 million, 27.8 million to be exact, comes in terms of ad valorem tax revenue. That's followed by transfers and contributions. Again, that transfer that comes in from either the CRA or the utility fund, the solid waste fund. There are state shared revenues, that is the percentage of sales tax that we get back, utility services tax, franchise tax. You can see all the way through of where dollars come in. So for a total of $72.3 million in revenue. Something to point out when you look at that transfers and contributions, one of the things that we have advocated for and have really taken a very hard line on at the state legislature, this has been part of our political advocacy efforts for the past 3 years, there are challenges to the transfers from utility funds into general funds. That has been on the chopping block and has been within the, I'd say, the crosshairs of the legislature for a number of years. It has not met, it has not gotten to the point of being enacted or even getting to the point of a presentation of a final bill for the governor's consideration. But I think that's something we're going to continue to see. I think you all would recognize that as well. If that were cut entirely, that $5.3 million becomes a hole in the general fund budget that has to be identified and made up for either through reducing services or offsetting that revenue through something else. Not knowing what that is, if you were to offset that revenue loss through an increase in ad valorem taxes, that $5.3 million is equal to 1.26 mils that you would have to increase the general fund or the ad valorem rate in order to generate that same revenue. I will say that we have been very responsible with our utility fund transfer. Those of you that were on the commission in 2017 will recall we were transferring upwards of $6 million at one time, more than that, to deal with the global financial crisis of 2008. That was a transfer from the utility fund in. That impacted our overall credit rating. It was recommended that we reduce that amount by $300,000 year over year until we got that number to be within 12% of the operating revenues of the utility system based upon the most recent audited fiscal year. We have been at 12% per policy for the past 4 years. So when the legislature looks at these things and says, hey, there's a lot of transfer happening out there and people aren't taking care of their utility system, well, I would argue that you guys first know firsthand the investments we're making into the utility system and that you have a very manageable policy when it comes to transfers out from the utility operations. Expenditures within the general fund, personnel make up the greatest expense in there because you've got the most number of bodies there. Between police, fire, parks and recreation, streets, you have a lot of positions. In addition to your administration, HR, finance, those are operations where you see you're going to have a lot of bodies. You don't have as much capital going on. And all the capital that happens within your general fund operations, so for streets, all of our road projects are in a transportation fund that's independent. All of your parks and recreation major projects are within a construction fund, so those are out separate. If you added in all of your capital construction costs to this general fund that you see here at 73 million, that number jumps by probably another $69 million in capital investment that's being made in those departments. The support of other funds I mentioned earlier, you can see there in the middle of the page, the general fund contributes about $1.3 million to the library, about $1.37 to the airport, small amount to cemeteries, very small amount to Willowbrook to offset some of the capital replacement costs associated with vehicles. There's money that gets transferred into the transportation fund. If you recall, we have a 1 mil set aside for capital projects that was adopted in 2018. $2 million of that revenue goes towards transportation improvement programs, and you can see that that transfer exists there. There's also money that's assigned for Diamondplex coming out of there and playground replacements. That's the transfer you see going into the 2015 construction fund. I noted that affordable housing transfer. There's also a small amount that goes towards urban forestry. When you look at the grant and aid that's at the bottom of the table, $615,000, again, that includes all of your community partners, your service delivery partners, as well as the nonprofit, those 40 agencies that you're funding. So the total amount that is going back to other agencies in the community, to not including Hartford Winter Haven or Winter Haven Mass Transit, there's almost $616,000 going out to other agencies to perform services in our community. The expenditures by department, non-departmental expenses, again, there's transfers and other expenses that come out of that, things to offset our internal service funds. But when you look at actual department expenses for personnel, capital, and operations, police and fire are at the top. That's what you would expect to see. Public safety is the first duty of government. I think that if you looked at any budget of any city across the country, you'd be hard-pressed to find one that doesn't have police at the very top of their expense categorization such as this. Together, police and fire total $30.7 million of the general fund costs. That represents over 42% of the total budget in the general fund. That's neither good nor bad. That is simply the reality of what it costs to deliver public safety. But I will tell you this. At $30.7 million, the ad valorem revenue that is generated in the community is $27.89 million. So the ad valorem tax proceeds that come in, those revenues, fail to cover the cost of police and fire by $2.8 million. In order to have an ad valorem that just covered police and fire alone, you'd have to increase from 6.59, you'd have to add another 0.66 mils to that. Not suggesting we do that in any way, shape, or form, just pointing out the reality of why we're so dependent upon some of those other revenue sources that we have. And when it comes time for the legislature to look at things like eliminating transfers from utility funds or eliminating business tax receipt programs, things that we don't have a whole lot of sources to get revenue for general fund expenses. So we're very mindful and very conservative in how we budget those, but we're also very protective when there's efforts that want to restrict those or reduce those. Self-insurance fund, as you know, the city of Winter Haven is self-insured. That means that we are covering the cost to offset medical expenses beyond what our employees pay when they go for a service. You can see at the bottom, the city of Winter Haven contributes about $4.6 million to the self-insurance fund. Employees, through their benefit package, contribute about $1 million. Retirees, just under $500,000. And then through rebates and the various programs we have with Florida Blue and others, we attract about another $570,000. Your plan cost for 2024, $6.7 million. That has gone up slightly since the prior year, but one of the most impressive things I think within this is if you look to 2019, we remain below pre-pandemic self-insurance costs. I can't explain that. You know, we've put some programs in place. We're encouraging employees to get checked for health screenings much sooner. You know, don't wait until something really bad happens. Go get a physical. Go get the appropriate checks for your age or for your gender. Do all those things so you stay ahead of the curve. We've certainly try and advance wellness programs that we have. You know, getting employees to understand, don't go to an emergency room for a cough. You know, use our telemed system or use an urgent care if need be. All those things help reduce our costs at the end of the day. So we continue to focus on that, and I would say that we're having success in that arena. Employee pension costs, in all three pensions that you have, so there's a general employee pension plan that is closed to any new members coming in. It does still have members within it. You have a fire pension plan that new firefighters do enroll in, and a police officer pension plan that new police officers come into. All of them will see an increase in fiscal year '25 in terms of the city's contribution as a percentage of payroll. Why is that? Well, two main factors within the general employee pension plan. I'd actually say three. One, it's closed to new members, so you don't have any new money coming into that. Two, you have salary increases that have occurred over the years in response to cost of living that have outperformed or exceeded what the assumptions of the actuarial assessments may have planned for. And if you look in the lower right-hand corner, you can see in fiscal year '22 and '23, the investment returns were significantly less than what the assumptions were. I will turn to MJ and others who work with our pensions, that what we're seeing so far, particularly in the general employee pension, that our investment returns for this year have been significantly better than what we've seen the past 2 years. So that's going to continue to move up. In the firefighter pension plan, again, you can see an increase of about 4% in terms of city's contribution as a percentage of payroll in fiscal year '25. Lower right-hand corner, 2.82% actual performance in '22 and 4.58% in '23. Seeing better performance current year, but we're dealing with those years as well. Couple things that have impacted the firefighter pension plan. Again, increases in salaries, poor performance in consideration of what the assumption was, and then you also have a what we describe as an inactive mortality experience, meaning that when people retire, they're living longer. They're in a better health condition, and therefore they're receiving a benefit from that pension for a longer period of time. Police pension, exact same scenario as the fire, although I will say that their cost in terms of a percentage of payroll is significantly less than half of that of the fire pension. So they have had some very good performance in terms of their rates of return over the years. Also, if you have officers that leave before vesting, that certainly benefits the pension plan. We don't want to see that, but that is one of the, I guess, beneficial outcomes unanticipated when people, they don't stick with us for very long. If they're here for 5 years and they move on, the pension does not suffer from that. It actually benefits somewhat, although the citizens do not. Speaking to wages, I want to spend a few minutes here and go back over what happened in 2020. As you remember, our voters in the state of Florida in 2020 approved at over 60% Amendment 2, which gradually raised the state's minimum wage to $15 an hour by September 30th of 2026. It did that by taking a $1 increase year over year, starting in September of '22. Going forward, it was certainly a larger jump leading up to September of '21, as you can see on the chart there. We had to make some changes to our own payroll at that time to be in line with that, to make sure that we didn't fail to meet what those minimum wage requirements were going to require. And so what you see on the right hand of that column are adjustments that the city made. Now, before I dive into that, I want to point out that blue bar in the middle of the page, that if you look at what the current living wage in Polk County is in terms of affordability, it is at $20.26 per hour. What that contemplates is how much money do you have to earn in a year to cover your rent or mortgage, your utilities, your food, your transportation, your clothing, and other consumable items. If you are a single individual in Polk County, that's what that number looks like. If you're a single parent with one child, 2 children, 3 children, that number goes higher and higher and higher. If you're a married couple living together with no children, if only one of you is working, that number goes higher. If both of you are working with no children, that number comes down a little bit. If you're a nuclear family, 2 working parents, 2 children, the annual wage for both parents will be above that $20.26 per hour. Now look at the column on the right for the city of Winter Haven. In December of 2020, that is less than 4 years ago, entry-level positions in Winter Haven were making $21,923. It's amazing how much things have changed over 4 years and as the result of COVID and what happened with the cost of living. In September of 21, our entry-level positions were making $28,000. A year later, $29,300. In September of 23, so less than a year ago, entry-level positions, and actually even today, at our entry rate of $14.55, they make $30,264. What we are proposing, while we wanted to try and get that wage to $20 an hour, I'm here to tell you that we just don't see a feasible way to make that happen, certainly not within 1 year. This is a massive elephant, and we will eat at it one bite at a time. But to get to that $20 an hour would cost about $9 million. And we just don't have that luxury to take that on, certainly year over year over year. But we did want to try and move that needle to make life more affordable for our employees. At the same time, looking at what do we need to do to be competitive within the market for the positions that we have. So what we have recommended is that we increase that $14.55 minimum entry level starting rate to $16 an hour. In doing so, that positions us to be much more attractive in terms of retaining employees who may go someplace else for an additional 50 cents an hour, as well as to compete against those who are paying $15 an hour to go work in retail or in food and beverage, certainly in conditions that would be much easier than what our employees do, mowing and working on pipes and working on roadways. If we can get that number up to 16, we feel certainly that we can retain our workforce, not have a brain drain of talent, and we can attract higher quality candidates to join the team. In raising that rate to $16, that would be for vacant positions that we have today and anybody that would start with the organization after October 1st. We would also recommend that you approve or consider increasing the rate for our existing employees. It's $1.45 to get to 16, so that you don't have compression. We recommend that we go to $1.55 for our incumbent employees above their current pay. That totals out for a typical 2,080-hour work year. That's 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, inclusive of all the holidays and everything. That equates to $3,224 additional dollars for every employee in the organization. In years past, we would say, let's do a 3% across the board. 3%, and I'll use me as the example, and I'll use you as the other end. 3% on my salary is a fairly significant amount. You five are the lowest paid people in the entire organization. 3% for you guys doesn't do a whole lot. It doesn't do much for landscapers and maintenance operators either. In my estimation of it, the people that are earning more will earn more. The people that are earning less will earn slightly more, but less than those that are earning more. It's not a very equitable approach if we're trying to address affordability. Giving everybody the same dollar value of an adjustment does that. It also allows us to move the entire workforce up by that amount, so it does not result in any compression within the organization. We don't get pay classifications closer to each other where everybody's taking one step forward in that process. It's most impactful to our frontline employees, our parks employees, our utility servicers, our building service workers. Those individuals will probably see somewhere close to what might be as high as an 11% adjustment in their overall pay with that. In our mid-level positions, assistant superintendents and some of those, you're going to see what's probably close to about a 5% adjustment on their salaries, what it would equate to. Everybody's the same dollar amount. Your higher level positions, your department directors, captains, administrators, Some cases, it may be a 2%, maybe a 1.5%, but it's the same dollar amount. I want to be very, very clear in saying this. We note on here police sergeants, fire lieutenants and inspectors, firefighters, and police officers. We are still at the collective bargaining table in negotiations with our unions. So I have to plug something into my budget so that I know maybe it's going to be more than that, maybe it's going to be less than that, but I have to have something to start from. But we have not settled negotiations with those two entities. I do know that the police union has tentatively agreed to the proposal that we've submitted, and they will have a vote at the end of this month, but that vote is, I will not make any assumptions on that, and I don't wish the commission to either. We have to wait for that process to work through. We will continue to negotiate with the fire department in good faith. Ultimately, what this does, however, is it helps us address vacancies. It gives everybody the same benefit at the end of the day, and it makes life a little more affordable for our frontline employees that are doing yeoman's work, particularly in days like today where it's 100 degrees outside. We've got to do something to help our employees, and it's going to take one bite at a time. You'll note on this table the number of vacancies. I don't want that to be misleading. You see a 17% vacancy rate in mid-level supervisors. I would suggest that every one of those 10 vacancies go ahead and be reassigned to the frontline workers, because when you fill those, you're going to fill them from within with frontline workers, and all it does is rearrange those chairs on the deck. So those vacancies, instead of being at mid-level positions, will now fall to entry-level positions. Again, that $16 an hour rate becomes critical in trying to backfill those positions. We're also looking at some potential further adjustments with some critical positions. You notice that you may recall we did this a few years ago in garbage and in fleet. I am working directly with our utilities director, our Winter Haven water director, Gary Hubbard, and Sean Dykes, our HR director, to look at our treatment plant operators in consideration of where we are in the market. We will bring back a utility-specific budget in early August. That's a completely different realm of discussion, and we didn't want to cloud that this evening as we still work through some capital items there. I mentioned we'll still have a step plan in place. This is intended to recognize the longer you're in a position that you should have a step. Unfortunately, this doesn't apply to the city commissioners. You don't get a 2.5% step plan on your annual anniversaries of election. Mayor Birdsong, you would be sitting pretty good after 20-plus years there, but all the same, it does apply to our employees, and on their 5th year, they can get up to a 3.5% to recognize those 5-year milestones. New positions that are within the budget. One of the most significant things that will happen in the coming year is that in August, the school resource officer program will be taken over entirely by the sheriff's office. We have 7 SROs in Winter Haven. 6 of those are assigned to the public school system. 1 is assigned to New Beginnings High School. We will still work with New Beginnings, as I understand, but the ones that we have assigned to the schools, Denison, Jewett School of the Arts, Winter Haven High School, we also have a floater within there. Those will now be staffed with sheriff's office employees. And we will continue to work with them. We have a great relationship. We certainly know the students. It's important that we do interface regularly. As we know of challenges that are happening in the community, they know of challenges that are happening within the schools. We have to share intelligence in that for the most positive outcomes. The sheriff's office actually pays us for a percentage of those 6 officers that we have in the school system today. They pay 75% of the entry-level rate of a police officer. They offset that value for those 6 that we have. Now, it doesn't mean that we're getting 75% of the cost covered, because some of our school resource officers are more senior officers. They've been here a long time. They're not making the entry-level rate. Regardless, that funding is all going away. I'll use the example of grant funding. If you had in your business a grant that provided for technical assistant to work with you and that grant dried up, that position would probably go away. That's kind of the situation that we're in with our school resource officers, is that we have grant funding that's coming in. but my recommendation is that those positions don't go away. We retain those FTE. They are seasoned, qualified, credentialed, and knowledgeable officers that we have. We will absorb them into our organization. We will pay for them through additional allocation of funds to the police department, and that will allow us to expand the force that we have. And I'll leave that to the chief of police to decide how best to do that, if that's adding an additional member to each one of our squads, if that's assembling community policing teams or special operations teams to combat specific issues that we have. But we will have 6 more FTE or full-time equivalent officers at our disposal that we don't have today because they have been sitting at a school dealing with that. Schools are still protected, but we'll have more officers to work with. The positions that we've added into the budget, as I mentioned earlier, there are 12 full-time positions that come into the general fund. In Public Affairs and Communication, the Staff Assistant 1, this is the person that sits at the front desk. Historically, that position has been housed within utility operations, our account services. We have brought that under the umbrella of Public Affairs so that we can have more consistent messaging and a little more ease in the backup and redundancy for that position through the other staff that are housed right here in City Hall. We are recommending the addition of a staff assistant within the city clerk's office. This is something the city clerk has been asking for a number of years. Given some of the challenges we have with public records requests, making sure we stay on top of those, not that we're not doing that, but just the number that come in, and then also the digitizing of historic documents that we have stored for years and years and years at our airport. We need to get all of that stuff digitized, and if it's per state retention statutes, if it needs to be disposed of, that we do that properly. This will give them some additional staff to do that. In the finance department, we have a 2-member procurement team. So that $296 million budget that I just mentioned, if you back out all of the personnel costs within that and just look at everything we spend on operations and capital and buying cars and tools and equipment, all that flows through our procurement office through the hands of 2 people. That's a significant workload. You all have been parts of ITBs, RFPs, RFQs over the past year, or as long as you've been on the commission. You know what it takes to assemble those and process them. We need some help there, so this gives them an additional body. In public safety, you can see the police officers, those 6 full-time positions. I have spoken on that. We're also recommending the addition of a CSR, a Customer Service Representative 1, to work with our records staff specifically in the area of body-worn camera records, the redaction and production of those in response to records that are requested. The next 2 line items, the Winter Haven Recreation and Cultural Center, and the bottom 4 items are all tied to the operation of new facilities that will come online either in 2025 spring or in 2025 fall. Those are recommended in the case of Winter Haven Recreation and Cultural Center to come on at 25% of the year. So they're only budgeted at 25% of the cost. For the Chain of Lakes Park activity fields that you see there, those are expected to come on sometime in January, February timeframe. You can see that all of those with activity fields are part-time staff. Again, that speaks to our intent to operate using part-time staff versus full-time staff. We can have as many part-time staff as we need. We only have so many hours to assign. But if somebody, if Commissioner Dancer was not on the commission and never retired and had a love for baseball, as he certainly does, and wanted to come work at Chain of Lakes Park as a concessionaire or a ticket attendant and only work 5 hours a week, this is that type of opportunity that we create. We have so many retirees that are coming here that still want to be engaged and active. It's a way to make that happen. In the middle categories there in the field house, that is tied to our field house operations, that recreation attendant. The other 2, the rec attendant and the rec leader, that is tied to an expansion of summer camp programs. That program is wildly successful, and we want to continue to expand that. We'll continue to pursue efforts to work with the school district to utilize school campuses so we can provide more services to more families in that regard. Building permitting, we're recommending the addition of a deputy building official for some succession planning and redundancy within our building inspection operations. We're also recommending the addition of another building inspector just to keep up with the amount of construction that is happening in our area. a crew leader within our cemeteries. The 4 library lines that you see there total 3 full-time and 2 part-time positions. Those again are funded at 25% of the year to align with the opening of the branch library at the Winter Haven Recreation and Cultural Center. And then a total of 5 full-time positions within our water plants. In IT, 1 full-time smart city analyst. Again, trying to manage the varieties of software that we have and the platforms, as well as keep up with cybersecurity needs. That operation is becoming more and more technical and intense in terms of number of bodies we have to have there, and we'll continue to employ the part-time interns to assist us. We also have a part-time position recommended for adding to the fiber systems technician. That would give them 1 full-time and 1 part-time position in our dark fiber operations. Fleet maintenance, over 600 units of fleet that we maintain, getting more and more technical. We added our first electric vehicle this year to the fleet within our natural resources operations, but we need to expand that fleet maintenance staff. We're recommending 2 bodies there. And then within solid waste, you see the growth we're having. As we see homes come online, we need to be prepared to pick up horticulture waste, recycling, and garbage. So that allows for us to add 2 members to our solid waste team at mid-year. And that also aligns with when we anticipate receipt of new vehicles to be able to put them in. In total, 29 full-time positions, 24 part-time positions recommended for the fiscal year 25. We have a number of positions get reclassified. This is when we look at positions and make sure that their job function, what they actually need to do and what they are doing, aligns with the job description, and then we assess that against what is the rate of pay or the pay grade and classification they should be in. We are transitioning a communications intern to a full-time position within public affairs and communication. You've seen through your strategic plan the level of work we're doing with metrics measurement, the communication platforms we have out to the community, our legislative advocacy efforts. We are doing more in public affairs and communication than we ever have. And in order to keep all those things rolling and being effective, we need to make sure that we're properly staffed there so that this gives them just a little more human capital within there to carry out their mission. The 3 positions that are noted for fire, these align with trying to right-size that organization and get some key roles filled that not only address current need but look to the future. So it's a conversion of our EMS coordinator to a rescue chief to oversee all of our EMS services. That is the vast majority of what we do within the fire department is medically related. Converting the fire training safety officer to a development chief. So that is development not only assigned with the programs that we have for maintaining paramedic training and firefighter training, but also the onboarding of new firefighters into the system. And then a strategic initiatives chief that we would take an existing fire lieutenant and modify that, increase it up to a strategic initiatives chief. This is really evaluating what's happening with our apparatus, our engines, what do we need to be planning for replacement, where do we need to be identifying new stations to be down the road, what are the needs of existing stations that we have, what are changes within the industry that we need to be anticipating so that we can properly plan. Fieldhouse has a change from a customer service rep 2 to a recreation supervisor 1. And then in activity fields, I mentioned the addition of all those part-time positions, changing that food service leader to a food service crew leader because they will have quite a crew to oversee and manage. Within engineering, there's 3 positions. Those actually have a reduction in overall cost, and that is just really aligning what we had as historical positions within the organization to what the need is today. And then also a change in facility maintenance to create an additional level of supervision in that operation. In the airport side of things, there's a part-time tech position that we're recommending make that into a full-time position. This will allow us to have the same level of staffing, number of bodies, and at the appropriate positions on every shift so that there is consistency throughout that operation. And then there's an adjustment to the customer service manager position within account services to align with responsibilities and market rates. Overall, in terms of salary adjustments, those reclassifications total out at just about $97,500. Okay, so general fund, this is where most everything happens in terms of police, fire, parks, streets, the commission, clerk, city manager. Revenues for fiscal year '25, a little over $72 million. It's a slight increase over what it was prior year of about $6 million. The expenditures, a little bit less than they were last year. We dropped down to $73 million, so we have about $6 million more in revenues and about $3 million less in expenses. That's a good thing to see. So you see that the ending fund balance is projected to be about $26.1 million. And I'm going to talk about that fund balance momentarily so you can get a picture of where that stands. City Commission, the only changes really here deal with some of the programs that you attend, travel and training expenses, and then some of the community sponsorships we do. City Clerk obviously reflects the addition of a new position. City Attorney remains relatively flat. City Manager's Office sees a decrease because we pull out all of Public Affairs and Communication and we place that within its own cost center. So you can see the cost center below it, Public Affairs and Communication, has no expense for fiscal year '24, but does have an expense for fiscal year '25. That includes 2 new bodies as well as some efforts to advance our strategic plan and communication outreaches. Finance, slight uptick in finance, $261,000. We do have an additional body there. Planning, no real changes there. Their decrease is really tied to the reduction of some one-time purchases that were in prior years. Within operations, you can see that was about $192,000 difference year over year. Safe Neighborhoods, increase of about $197,000. They still have some positions open there that are some budgeted positions that are vacant, but they have recently filled a couple of those, so we're excited to see what continues to happen within their operations. Police, an increase of about $588,000. That includes the those 6 officers plus the CSR for the body-worn camera records, as well as some additional tools for their operations. Fire Department sees an increase of about $1.3 million. A lot of that has to do with rise in pension costs that they have, as well as the increase in salaries over the years. And they also have an uptick in overtime associated with their operations. Parks and Recreation, some new funded positions as well as expanded operations, and there's some one-time maintenance or capital-related expenses within their operations that account for that $2.5 million increase. And then in streets, again, a slight decrease. You can see that that is all housed within operating and capital. Again, last year's budget had some one-time purchases that this year's budget does not. Fund balance, this is where it all comes down to, at the end of the day, how much money do we have left? So we are estimating that at the conclusion of fiscal year 2025, the city will have a fund balance that equates to about 36%. Your minimum threshold that you want to stay above is 17%. Your goal per fiscal policy is 30%. The difference between 30% and the 36% that you see here is about $4.1 million. We will be bringing back to you a recommendation. The policy that was adopted by the Commission in 2023 calls for those funds to be directed towards one-time capital investments, and our intent is that that will go towards, first and foremost, the Fire Station 5 project on Lake Hartridge. That was, some money came off of that portion of the construction to help with Station 4. And we've talked about this a number of times recently. That will be the #1 priority for that. Additional projects that we're looking to put funds towards would be the acquisition of parkland in southeast Winter Haven for another park to serve the growing population out there. Also trying to identify a location and path forward for pickleball expansion facilities and putting that within our construction fund to begin earmarking money for that. I will say that Julie and her team are working to find additional pickleball interim opportunities for that audience through use of the additional hard court at the tennis complex, and upon completion of our summer camp, designating specific indoor time within the field house. So overall, fund balance sitting very strong. I think that this would be the envy of any city in Polk County, probably any city in the country, to know that you've got 30%, actually 36%, that allows us to deal with some of the increased costs that we see for capital projects and how quickly those can go up year over year. I commend the Finance Department for bringing those policies forward and for the Commission to be as bold as they were to enact those. Certainly, it's helped our credit ratings overall and has positioned us well. Some of the significant items that are capital-wise and one-time expenses within the general fund, you see some repair and maintenance projects within police and fire. In Parks and Grounds, one thing I want to point out here, the rights-of-way in Parks Contract Services, that is where we haven't really added any bodies to our Parks staff, the landscape staff, yet we add parks constantly. Reuben Williams Park, South Central Park came on in 2018. We didn't add any new bodies with that. It's just year over year, we're getting more green space. We're trying to keep up with that. We're using the private sector to help us do that in a lot of places now. But the line underneath that is probably the most exciting. I've not gotten an update yet this week, but it looks like we are going to get at least 2 of our Polk Correctional Institute inmate workforces back. That gives us 10 working individuals plus 2 supervisors to help tackle rights-of-way and some of our cemetery maintenance, some of our large maintenance areas outside of the activated park system. In Parks Administration, Lions Park, this is a smaller park on the south shore of Lake May. It has a small meeting facility and a playground and a boardwalk fishing dock. City acquired that in the early 2000s from the Lions Club, yet has not made a whole lot of investment into it, just some minor repairs. This is an effort to go in and really look at what do we need to do with that park to meet the needs of the community that could be served by it immediately around it. Shuffleboard courts involves the resurfacing of some shuffleboard courts. The cabana shade covers involves the refurbishment of those shade structures that we have at the new tennis complex. Under the field house, the restroom upgrades, $200,000. That is to address some historical plumbing issues in the older part of the building. They weren't part of the renovation that took place in 2019, but something that we need to deal with long-term. Leisure Park Rentals, doing some improvements to the building envelope at the Women's Club. And then also at the Garden Center, doing some grounds and irrigation renovation, as well as renovating the kitchen. That's really the last thing I believe that we have to do at the Garden Center. That was a project the city took over, I'm going to say in 2021. Commissioner Dance, does that sound correct? I know you were instrumental in making that happen. Activity fields, a new storage building out there for Sertoma Park football. We've done a lot of improvements out there on the baseball side. We had done some improvements years ago on the football side, but they do need some storage for football equipment. Also within the general fund in the street side, pedestrian bridge repairs. Those are the 2 bridges that you see along the Chain Lakes Trail up on the canal that crosses from Lake Hartridge to Lake Conine, and then there's another one further north that is part of the outfall system of Lake Pansy. And then electric charging stations. We budget those within the general fund. Those would get pushed out to new projects that come online. So Winter Haven Recreation and Cultural Center, we'd expect to have charging stations there. Chain Lakes Park Phase 2, Fire Station 5, Fire Station 4. So that is part of our investment into the EV infrastructure for the city. And then last but not least on this page, the ADA transition plan. This is a federal requirement that when we're getting federal dollars, having an ADA transition plan is a requirement. It not only is it a requirement for grant funds, it is also essential to make sure that we're evaluating all of our facilities and assets to make sure that we are accommodating to those who may have physical or otherwise barriers to gaining access. It says it's within the streets division, but it certainly applies to parks. It applies to public spaces that you're in today. It applies to processes in which we communicate information out digitally as well. Okay, airport. MJ and CJ were just sharing with me beforehand, we had some discussion on this yesterday during a dry run of this. Airport revenues are actually covering personnel and operating costs at the airport. What's not being covered within the airport is the capital expansion, and that's okay. The fact that we're getting a significant amount of funds from the federal and state government to offset capital, at the end of the day, the revenue sales, the rents, the services that are paid directly to us, that we provide and people pay us for at the airport are offsetting our operational and personnel costs. The annual contribution from the general fund drops this year by about $750,000. That's mostly tied to, again, some increases in revenues, but also a shift in some of the capital projects that we're doing there. The major projects going on at the airport, obstruction clearing, that's at the end of our runways, the remote control tower project you're familiar with, Commerce Park Phase 1, those are improvements that are on the western side of the existing airport terminal. Those will allow us to facilitate more economic growth and development to the west, headed towards Auburndale area. The Blue Line Aviation hangar development will occur in that area, but these improvements will also be a catalyst, we expect, for additional hangar investment in that area. And then the emergency generators, the commission just recently approved. That project is moving forward. Taxiway E extension, this kind of runs to the, I'm going to say, the southeast direction of the airport that will give access down towards what will eventually be, we expect to be a permanent bricks and sticks facility for the Winter Haven High School and Polk County Public Schools aerospace program, Aerospace Academy program that is presently in the portables. And then a master plan update. The biggest takeaway from this, and you can see there's some additional costs that we have at the bottom for some improvements to emergency plans and signs in the restaurant, but of the major capital, $5.26 million, the city's investment in that is just a little over 19 cents of every dollar. So about 81 cents of every dollar spent on capital is either coming from the federal government or the state government. If we could get that on every project, we'd be sitting very pretty. Library fund, not much change here, although once the new library opens up, we'll see operational costs increase, we'll see circulation increase. Both of those combined will help us with our funding formula through Polk County Library Cooperative, because that's what that funding formula is built off of. And so we'll also see an uptick in county contribution or other revenues. There's a notation at the bottom. The library has issued 3,190 cards in 2023 and had almost 420,000 visitations in that single year. That is not the highest that it's ever been. Certainly transitions over time in how people access books and digital information has had an influence on that. But to say that you had 420,000 visitations to the library is quite impressive. That is certainly a traffic generator for downtown Winter Haven. Cemetery fund, not many changes within it. You can see that the general fund support has gone up slightly, $100,000. Their other revenues down slightly to $113,000. So that's really tied to lot sales, opening and closings. That number's come down a little bit over the past 2 years. It's spiked. I hate to say it because it's not really what you want to see, but that number jumped tremendously following COVID. And likewise, operational expenses dropped during COVID. We didn't have as much going on, although we were doing a lot of sales and a lot of interments at the same time. So it was a unique situation for us. We do have 538 cemetery plots remaining that are platted and can be sold today, but there is an additional 42 acres of land at Rolling Hill Cemetery that can be expanded. There are still mausoleum spaces that are available within the Lakeside Cemetery, and there are niche spaces that we have quite a number of within Lakeside and the ability to expand those as well. So I think we're well situated for future growth within the cemetery side of the house as that comes to be necessary. Capital Fund, I mentioned most of the projects that are tied to capital within the general fund don't live in the general fund. They live in a special project fund, or special fund known as the Capital Project Fund. We will be bringing to you, I think in the next month or so, a package or an agenda item to combine the two construction funds that we have. We have a 2015 and a 2021. Those were kind of set up because that's where the bond proceeds, how they were aligned. There's no sense in really having two separate construction funds. It's more complicated for everybody at the end of the day. So we're going to recommend to you that we combine those. But within your construction funds, you can see the projects that you have. Those total out at $69 million. All of those are tied to Parks and Recreation with the exception of Fire Stations 4 and 5. And I would say that all of those are underway in some form or fashion, with the exception of Lake Silver revetment. You just signed a agreement with the FWC, I think at your last commission meeting, for that grant program. And the Diamondplex renovations, that's a lighting retrofit and upgrade at Diamondplex. That will happen sometime in likely the off-season of the operations there in 2020, late 24, early 25, that will commence. Transportation Fund, the biggest project here is Pollard Road, which is the south portion that goes from Plant 3, wastewater treatment Plant 3, all the way down to Logistics Parkway where it stops today. I don't know if you've had a chance to go out to Pollard Road, but the north phase of that project is complete. It is phenomenal. Don't know that I'd ever say that about a road that runs to a wastewater treatment plant. I'm sure the staff out there love having this, but it is what was once a very, I'd say, poorly designed roadway system. It wasn't really intended to carry perhaps the traffic that we're going to see out there long-term of residents coming into the new subdivisions there, but also workers getting into the intermodal logistics park. It is now a two-lane road. It's got a trail system on one side. It's got stormwater retention. It is a tremendous improvement to that area. About 4 lines down, the TIP, that's that $2 million for transportation improvement projects. That's milling and resurfacing, microsurfacing, all the different tools in the toolbox that Brittany Hart and her team have to maintain our roadways and keep them in good repair for the long term. Other projects that are in there, the quiet zones, we're still working through that, working with CSX to advance that. That will be a quick project once we get everything signed off, and we're hoping that will happen relatively soon. South Lake Howard East, kind of in the middle of the page there, that is going to be the project that goes basically from the canal at Lake May, Lake Howard, around to the south to 15th Street. And then South Lake Howard West will continue from 15th Street down past South Lake Howard Nature Park. There's also a project designated as East Lake Howard Pedestrian Improvements. That is a project that will go from the boat ramp on the east side of the lake next to Tom Jennings' accounting office. It will start there generally and go south towards the canal bridge that I just mentioned. So when these projects are done, there will be trail components or pedestrian facilities that go from Avenue G on the far west side of the lake, around the north side, and almost back to Avenue G coming around. We've got some challenges on that section on the very western side, but we're working to see how best to mitigate that. CRAs, I mentioned, they met this week. They had back-to-back meetings Monday evening. So the Florence Villa CRA has at its disposal $1.3 million to work with in new revenues. The downtown CRA will see new revenues of $3.7 million. This is based upon their valuations of properties within the district. In the downtown CRA, you can see their budget, how it's allocated out, about $155 for personnel, about $749,000 for operating, a little over $2 million for capital. They have some non-departmental costs. I mentioned that they have some transfer that comes into the general fund for bond debt service. At the end of the day, given their cash carry forward, their fund balance, they have expenditures that will total around $5 million. Florence Villa CRA, you can see their layout. They will have expenditures that total around $3 million. So this week, Angie and Eric and Samis presented to the CRAs, not only where they are. First of all, they gave a very thorough report on where we are with some of our grant programs, so facade grants for residential and commercial properties, the incentive package for sidewalk cafe furniture downtown, some of those efforts. So both advisory committees have a good understanding of where we sit with that. In the downtown CRA projects that were recommended for carrying forward in the final budget proposal by that advisory committee, in which will come to you as the CRA board, include the FDOT pond that is down by Bowen Yard, the undergrounding of some overhead TICO lines in the downtown area, street lighting along the recently completed Avenue C Southwest Complete Street project, some park and right-of-way renovations, uplighting the water tower. This is kind of an exciting project in that it's about how do we put some light on that water tower and make it somewhat entertaining in drawing people to the downtown, not just lighting it up, but things that can change colors and do different things that make it kind of a beacon for downtown, if you will. Some property acquisition should that opportunity avail itself. The TICO wall is about constructing a wall around the substation on 2nd Street Southwest to beautify that area. Bus shelters to take some of the non-sheltered bus stops that we have and create some facilities there that make it a little more accommodating for people when they're standing out in summer rains or extreme heat. The cafe expansion, that's in the event that there's a request that is vetted out and it's shown to have merit for expansion of our sidewalk cafe program. One area that may come into play with that, depending on what happens to the buildings that are slated as the Taylor Hotel buildings. We did not put a sidewalk cafe in there at the time because we didn't know what would happen with that. If those properties develop with something that wanted a sidewalk cafe, the CRA could consider that and would have funds to advance it. And then I mentioned microtransit. That is about the acquisition of the actual equipment, the type of gem cars or golf carts. But what we would do in terms of the operation of that, both here and in Florence Villa, we would look to somebody that actually knows how to operate transit. That would be the Lakeland Area Mass Transit District. We have spoken with them already about this. This would be a case where we own the equipment. They provide the drivers. They are licensed, insured, certified to provide that. They understand how to make that work. In Florence Villa, a significant investment into the Neighborhood Services Center to bring about that modernization. There's also some CDBG funds that will go into that project. They are doing some great work there. In the facility, while it's in very good condition and has been improved recently in terms of general upkeep and routine maintenance, this would allow us to do some significant improvements to better serve our seniors in the Florence Villa area. Property acquisition, that is about working with willing landowners to assemble small undevelopable parcels so that perhaps they can be developed into something that is beneficial. A lot of small lots, remnant lots from when First Street was expanded out there. This would be in no way any type of taking or eminent domain. This is working solely with those that would be willing to partner in the process. Some consideration for the history element that will go inside of the Winter Haven Recreation and Cultural Center. I know that Commissioner Dollison has been very active in that group's planning of how do we recognize and retain the history of that facility. Residential infill lot assistance, sidewalk enhancements, again, bus shelters, not creating new bus shelters, improving the ones that we have. That's in both cases. And then again, a consideration for exploring microtransit opportunities. Willowbrook, we do have a contractor on board to advance the Willowbrook Improvement Project. That got a little bit delayed because we had a contractor on board, and then they backed out and couldn't do the project because of some insurance requirements, as I understand it, and bonding. So the second bidder was awarded the project, and we are working with them on the final scope of services. This will include things such as the on-course restroom renovation of the greens, cart paths, drainage, irrigation. So you can see that there is $2.4 million earmarked in the middle of that page for capital. They are, we expect that we're going to lose a little money at Willowbrook this year because when you have renovations going on, it's going to be disruptive. And that's okay because you're making the facility better, knowing that once you come out on the other side, you're likely to see those revenues increase because people want to come be a part of what's new and improved there. So you'll drop for a short period of time, but we expect that will tick back up upon the reopening. It won't close for any period within there, it'll just be disrupted. In the solid waste fund, no major changes in here. I did mention that we have 2 new drivers that we'd like to bring on at 50% of the year. You can see at the bottom of the table, vehicles, about $1.1 million set aside for the acquisition of new vehicles, trying to be ever mindful of what those, the timing and delivery of those can be. Vehicles in solid waste cost us between $350,000 and $400,000 now for our residential trucks and our commercial trucks. Our horticulture trucks, a little less than that. We are still seeing some delays in getting those delivered, but that has significantly improved over the past 3 to 4 years. There's also a set aside within there for the field house, recognizing that when the Phase 2 baseball facility comes online, trying to manage and address solid waste issues there. We'll put a compactor into that facility, so solid waste will help assist with that. You can see that at $93,000. In the stormwater fund, they have a pretty significant cash carry forward. They also have some quite a few projects that will happen this year. You can see they've got about $4 million in capital that is set aside. They've got, let me jump to their projects real quick. South Lake Howard Nature Park. So as you recall, we bought the land, the WSIR property back around the COVID era, 2020 timeframe, and have actually added to that a little bit with a recent property acquisition of a smaller parcel, but there's $900,000 to begin that expansion, and that is under contract. We have a GMP, I believe, for that one, or not a GMP, a design for that one. So that will be advancing. The Lake Idle Sediment Project and the Lake Idle Stormwater Project, you just signed off on grant applications for those in the last, I'm going to say, either the last meeting or the meeting before. And then the Wetland Restoration Project at $800,000. That is the acquisition potentially of property on the north end of US 17, between US 17 and Lake Pansy, a significant wooded area up there that is a pretty environmentally significant wetland area to be restored. I mentioned that in 2018, we brought to the commission a recommendation to increase the millage by 1 mil. The commission at that time did so. And the intent was that 1 mil would go for capital projects. It wasn't going to go for salaries. It wasn't going to go for operations. It was going to go for capital projects. So you can see in fiscal year 25, the second column in or the third column in, that 1 mil generates $4.22 million. First thing right off the bat that comes off of it is the TIP. So $2 million going towards our transportation improvement program. There's money for our ongoing playground replacement efforts, money set aside for Diamondplex, and then you can see a series of projects that continue on from there. An interesting point in recently doing some research on transportation and transportation improvement programs, particularly pavement condition indexes. And I'm going to ask MJ to give me some of his recall on this. Our original, if you go back before we did this 1 mil, we were putting about $325,000 a year into TIP. And we were able to address we would have gotten our number of roads that were in a poor condition. I want to say it was less than, we might get down to maybe 35–40% in there. But because of that additional funding, that's somewhere down around 11% of our roads are in that very low category. So this is going a long way in addition to that expanded toolbox that the commission had approved us using. So in conclusion, I finally got there to the very end. It is a balanced budget. My recommendation to you as the elected body is that you leave your Millage rate at 6.59 mils. We don't know what the future holds, but I certainly can tell you that if you were to lower that millage rate, and if there was something significant that happened at the state legislative level in fiscal year '25, or calendar year '25, you'd be back here right off the bat having to make up that difference quickly. So I want to be ever mindful of that. Also, any changes that could happen economically. We have bankers and investors on this board. You guys are more in tune with that, but it is an election year, and that can certainly have some impacts on what the markets do. We continue to budget very conservatively on interest rates, despite what the past 2 years have shown us in terms of performance. But I do recommend you maintain a 6.59 millage rate. Total budget, $296,223,539. You continue to have a very strong budget within both of your CRAs and are making significant improvements in both. I think those CRA committees would tell you that they're extremely pleased with what they're seeing in terms of the strategies for how those monies are to be invested. You continue to fund affordable housing, both in setting aside an appropriation from the general fund, as well as making commitments to align with investments that both the public sector in terms of the affordable, the Winter Haven Housing Authority, and the private sector and agencies such as Blue Sky are making in our community. We continue our STEP program. We recommend a across-the-board dollar value adjustment for our employees to help address affordability. And our budget is built off of 736 total employees, of which this budget includes 29 new full-time and 24 part-time. I mentioned I'll be back to you in early August alongside Gary Hubbard to present our utilities budget that will highlight a lot of the capital, all of the things that speak to employee positions and the total expenditures of all funds. When I reference the utility expenses in here, that number will not change. How we allocate that money within the utility budget may fluctuate a little bit, but the bottom dollar will still remain the same. So with that, I'll happily stand for any questions you have, and I thank you for your attention on this matter.
Any questions, commissioners?
Couple.
Go ahead.
I hate to be the first one. Cliff, I'm gonna tell you, remember this budget's almost 300 million. When I first started, it was right around 100 million, so
Wow.
you'll always remember your first budget. So
Wow.
this is your, you'll always remember you were close to 300 million, so it's growing and, it's significant. T, of the 736 employees, how many of those positions are filled? Is it, are we, what's our, is it like?
Good question. Certainly the new ones would not be filled, so you don't have 29 that are going to be vacant. But if I go to, bear with me one second. So this is probably the best representation of it. You have 6 vacancies that are in our upper-level management positions.
Okay.
You have 10 that are within the mid-level range. I can tell you, in fire lieutenants, there's a number of vacancies within there. And then in the front line, there are 57 vacancies, so.
The 73 between the three levels.
Right.
Do you have like?
So about 10% of what that final number would be, but you got to go off of what it is today. So you got to back out the additional positions that we've recommended.
Do we have like a turnover rate? Is that normal? Are we still having a lot of turnover? I know during COVID, we were having a hard time finding people and because we had so many vacancies. Is that?
I'd say, Commissioner Dancer, we've done a lot of work to strengthen up certain positions. We had a lot of vacancies for a long time within police. We made some changes to the budget last year in terms of our rates of pay for police and some hiring bonuses and some things that we've done there. So I think we've narrowed that gap quite a bit. I'm looking to see if Chief Brennan is in the room. Chief, how many vacancies will you have based upon those that are in the academy today? 8. So 8 vacancies within law enforcement based upon who we have in the academy today. I'd say that that's very competitive and probably a lot better than most. Fleet, we're hanging on to folks. That was a scary one. And garbage, we're hanging on to folks. I think in water, that's probably an area where we can lose people quickly that they'll jump ship for just a small fraction of coin. But I think that,
Is there any department that has a higher turnover rate than the organization as a whole? Like, is police turning people over quicker than water and sewer, for example, or?
I'd have to research that,
Nothing
Commissioner.
glares.
I would guess you're probably going to see a higher turnover rate within probably a line department like utilities than you would in police, just given the nature of the jobs and what it takes, the credentialing that it takes to get into those jobs and the background checks and everything. To become a police officer, you got to jump through a lot of hoops. And folks aren't real quick to say, hey, I've jumped through all those, I'm going to go jump through them again somewhere else. So I think that that's probably a deterrent to some of that turnover.
Well, the reason that I'm getting into that is, in a perfect world, if we could figure out a way to put more money towards the higher turnover spots, particularly police, fire, whatever. I know fire's not a lot of turnover, but where we could make sure, because it costs a lot of money to replace a policeman, for example, or somebody that works in the sewer department, if we could somehow incentivize those particular positions to get people to stay.
I think that's what I'm recommending to you is that when, I can tell you right now, if I could pay every entry-level position $20 an hour, there wouldn't be a single vacancy on this report. But there's no way feasible that can happen in one swift move. I think that that's something you strategize for long-term over a 5, 6, 7-year window and see how do you move that needle even closer to that. But I think that being able to increase the starting rate that employee that started here within the last 6 months that's making $30,000 a year, to bump that up to $33,224 through what we've proposed here, it's certainly, that's a lot more money that I have each month to buy groceries, to pay rent, to not have to worry, am I going to pay a utility bill or pay the rent or eat. So I think that alone shows a tremendous investment in our employees, a concern. The benefit package remains extremely strong. And that's the other thing I want to point out. There's not a position that we have that doesn't have the opportunity for upward mobility. So that's just to get you in the door. Once you're here, if you're working in the water department and you get your asbestos certification, there's an incentive pay that comes with that. You have a CDL, you have an MOT certification, you have a stormwater certification. We pay for our employees to attain additional education so they can advance up. The other thing I'll say is that we have a program within utilities that, as an example, if you come in as a utility servicer 1, once you have attained certain skills and so much time with us, you become a 2. Once you've done so much skills and service with us, you become a 3. And I honestly would prefer to have every one of my utility servicers be a 3, because that means that they are the most qualified, skilled employees that you can have. And I looked at Tracy Mercer here. I mean, if I had my choice between a 3, 2 2s, and 3 1s versus having 6 3s, I'll take 6 3s every single day. And I'd say the exact same thing in the fire department. If I can matriculate up from a firefighter 1 to a 2 to a 3, if I could have every person on a shift outside of the lieutenant be a firefighter 3, we don't limit how many of those people we can have. If I got a crew of 4 firefighters and they can all be firefighter 3s, and I don't need to have any firefighter 1s, I'm doing beautiful. That is an ideal situation. That means I've got the most skilled people working for our citizens. And so creating programs to help them advance for that, I think, is what we have in play that helps with that retention.
Can I ask a question?
Oh, okay.
On this subject, do you pay it for ABC license 1, 2, 3s?
Yes, we do.
Do you pay, whether you need them or not, do you pay the highest?
Again, use the same example. If I have a wastewater treatment plant and I have 4 positions, an A, a B, a C, and a trainee, and they were all so skilled that they were all level As, that's the best situation you could ever hope for.
If somebody leaves, you still have trained staff.
Right.
And shuffle them
And that's
around.
why we don't limit the number of people that we can have in that position. Some cities, Commissioner Mercer, will say, we can only have 1A at this plant. If I have 4 positions and they're operators, they can, as long as I have an A, I'm good. But if they all want to be As and they can all meet the credentials and the time in the seat and can pass those tests, come on.
I agree.
Does Grady still work for us and still mow and do all that stuff, or is that, remember how he used to, his guests and used to come down and mow for us and
Well, what he does, Grady's never mowed for us.
his guests?
Although if you could get a picture
I
of
think
that.
he calls them his guests or whatever.
Yeah, he has we call it the Weekend Warrior Program. So this is a deferred sentencing type program that individuals can come work with us, and we assign them to our crews. They do a lot of manual maintenance within our right-of-way, within our landscape areas. We do still use that. There's some challenges with it. There are some supervisory challenges. So if you get female weekend warriors that come to work with you, you need to assign them to a female supervisor. Okay, that's one of the, and if you don't have a female supervisor on that day, you're kind of in a lurch there. But that number really drained off big time following COVID. It started to pick back up. We get some benefit out of that, and certainly we can use that. The bigger benefit is out of the Polk Correctional Institute, because that's 5 dedicated people.
That's what, yeah.
That's the biggie. And we had 4 of those at one time.
We're still getting doing that, though.
That went away in 2000. As soon as COVID shut everything down, that died, and it is just now coming back. We have pushed and pushed and pushed. I swear Steve Pruitt has the warden on speed dial and must have called every single day. Only for the purpose of asking about PCI crews, I promise. But just in the past 60 days, that ball has begun to move, and I'm hoping that we can bring back contracts to the commission for consideration for 2 of those crews in August.
Couple questions about CRAs, and I know you and I talked about this during our briefing, and I'm bringing this up for the other commissioners too, primarily to understand what I was talking about. The downtown CRA, and it's, all of us are getting emails now, including you, about the retail woes of people downtown that have retail outlets, and they make some valid points and they're asking for help. And I know stores and retail outlets are going to come and go, but we don't want a downtown of just bars. So, and I look at, like, for example, the Macy's building, and we have a lot of vacancies, big box buildings, and to me, that would be a perfect spot for something, whatever. But seeing as how we have a pretty healthy fund balance, is there any way that we could potentially use our CRA and hire some people, realtors or whoever it may be, that could help us run some sort of a retail outreach to try to fill some of these vacancies or help the ones that are struggling or whatever? I'm grasping for straws here because I don't know the answer, but I'm looking at, we have a pretty healthy fund balance. We have a real need in particularly in retail. And I know retail's a line, everybody's cutthroat, but I'm just sitting here trying to think of a way that we don't have a bar on every street corner in our downtown. We have to have some retail stores. And I know they got to come up with creative things, and it's up to them, but, they make some good points when we did that construction. It helped hurt some people. And that Macy's has been empty for years. I'd love to see Target go in there, something like that. But somebody's got to be proactive to go out and reach out to these Target and say, hey, come look at Winter Haven again or whatever. And that, to me, seems like that's a realtor. I know we don't have the staff for it, but maybe our CRAs could make that a priority if we as a commission make it a priority through our CRA. And if they say we don't have the money, well, we give them some money or whatever. I'm just trying to think out loud of ways that we could start some sort of a retail initiative to help some of our downtown retail outlets. So that's one thing. And then the other thing in Florenceville, the other thing that I mentioned to you, there's so many vacant lots that could become housing, but the houses are all tied up in probate. And they're 2 or 3 generations down. Next thing you have 15 beneficiaries instead of 1. And it just, I remember Doug Lockwood used to talk to me about this when he was a practicing attorney, that just takes so much time to get down in the weeds and contact these people and offer them some money or offer them an opportunity way to clean up some of these lots. And then we turn them over to Habitat for Humanity or Hartford Winter Haven or somebody that can build some housing, because everywhere you go, there's vacant lots. And I'm sure if you looked into it, it's because somebody in St. Louis owns a third and somebody in New York owns a third and somebody in Canada owns a third or something. And it takes a lot. So that's the other thing on these CRAs. If we could plow some of that money in towards an attorney to do that, if we as a commission make that important, and I think the CRA boards will come along with us. So those are a couple of thoughts that I'm having. And otherwise, I'm pretty content with what you put together. But go ahead. I've talked enough.
This is your time.
So I think very good points on both those. I certainly will work with Eric and Angie and city attorney on the kind of a downtown economic pathway of looking at some of those properties. You have to be mindful that they're not our properties, so we end up marketing on behalf of others, but those are properties within the CRA. And so I think that there is a pathway to make that happen, and certainly we'll give some exploration of that, report back to this group, including the Downtown CRA Advisory Committee. And I believe, I'll ask Eric to correct me if I'm wrong, but we've recently brought on Florida Acquisition and Appraisal within the Florenceville CRA to do exactly what you had suggested there, where we have willing landowners. How do we begin to assemble those? We may have to bolster that with some legal support in terms of clouded titles and multiple ownerships, but I think we have that as an initiative within the Florenceville CRA now.
Well, every attorney I talk to says that you just got to be dogged in your approach. You can't just send a letter and wait.
Right.
You have to follow up and follow up and follow up. John, you know.
Absolutely, you're
And
correct.
it could be your firm, it could be, but it's going to take a lawyer to just do this. And
Well, yeah, and working with Joe Blair and the Florida Acquisition Group, as City Manager noted, they were very good, very thorough. They did the Lake Albert Trail, if you may recall.
Right.
That was an astounding feat that we were able to get however many 53 parcels of land voluntarily conveyed to us. And while that's a little bit different, but you are absolutely correct, you need to have someone that is detail-oriented and has perseverance and doggedness to just go after it.
and they got to get paid. We can't ask people, like Doug's going to do it for free, and that just doesn't work.
No, you're correct.
They got to get something.
I think the idea here, at least in my mind, and I won't speak for staff, but I think we're going to identify those, I'm not going to call it low-hanging fruit, but I'm going to say those pieces of land that we can identify, at least on the surface, as being not as congested, not as tied up. Go after those, and then start the ball rolling,
Right.
generate the synergy. You know, you get some projects going, and then you really devote, all the while devoting your attention to those parcels that are a little bit more tied up. And so, but you're absolutely right.
Well, we're in a good position. We've got some people that want to build, they just don't have the land. I mean, Hartford Winter Haven, Habitat for Humanity, and there's other people that come before our Affordable Housing Committee that want to build. And if we had some inventory, they would build houses. They would do it. So, to the library real quick. I'm looking at the library budget. I don't see anything in there for the Florenceville Library, the extension of because I know we're going to put one in there, right? That's still on the agenda in the new building?
So that is, sorry, that it will not show up in the library itself. Now, keep in mind, that building is expected to come online after October 1st.
Okay.
So the operational cost, there it is, the operational cost will not appear until then. We will try and bring on some of the staff earlier. building the collection, getting systems in place, getting ramped up on training to operate that. But the construction of that, Commissioner Dantzler, falls within the actual cost of the Winter Haven Recreation and Cultural Center project. It's all housed within one budget.
Okay.
The airport, is there still a high demand for hangar space out there? Do we have a long list of people?
There is a very high demand for hangar space. Troy, do you know how many you have on the wait list? 74 on the T hangar wait list. They are in the process of finalizing some efforts with some commercial hangars that became available. And, we do a somewhat of an RFP process for those. I'll also tell you that we are in the process of inspecting all of our T hangars and commercial hangars to make sure that they are being used in accordance with what the leases call for. And if they're not being used to house the planes that they're supposed to be housing, then they can either be housing the planes that they need to, or we're going to make those available for other tenants. When you've got 70+ that are waiting for that space, high demand, we can't have T hangars out there that are storing RVs and boats and classic cars. They're there for planes. That's what they need to be used for.
That's a good point, and I keep thinking about, again, we have some money, and I keep thinking that maybe we ought to potentially put some money into some T hangars out there. And if it's going to automatically pay us back over 10 or 15 years or whatever it is, why would we not consider that, particularly if we can maybe get DOT or FAA to throw in some money like they always do. I'm just throwing that out there for us to consider, because that to me is a layup. The developers don't want to do it, because I've talked to plenty of them. So it looks like it's up to us to build some of these things, and maybe I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there for everybody else to think about. On the women's club, on the garden club, the women's club down on Lake Howard, for the longest time, we had a strong initiative to get grant money because of the historical perspective of that building. Is that still being worked? Do we know? Is there?
Part of the challenge there is where that money lives in the state budget. A lot of that got cut this current year. We still pursue that, when there's historical grants that we can go after. But yes, sir.
I've been a big advocate of moving Pony League baseball to the new Chain Lake Stadium and getting it out of Sertoma Park. That's just a personal feeling that I have, that the bigger kids shouldn't be with the littler kids.
I think I've heard you mention that a time or two.
Yeah. But that's going to take some money to do that, and that's probably 2025 too, I would imagine, truthfully.
Well, that's, that did not fall on deaf ears. Your Parks and Recreation Department understands that, and will work with the Sertoma Greater Winter Haven Youth Baseball to explore what, how does that happen? What does need to happen with that? Certainly, the expansion of Chain Lakes Park to create those additional fields, that project is underway. We're reviewing initial quotes from the various disciplines associated with that project in hopes of getting that underway quickly.
Okay, I'm good.
Anyone else?
So I just had a couple comments to the budget. Our large capital projects, I can't recall since being on this commission of a time where we didn't have a large capital budget item, whether it was the field house or, whatever. So that makes up, roughly $69, $70 million plus, another mid-teens million-dollar number in, other infrastructure projects. So when you back all that out, that kind of gets you down to more your nuts and bolts of operating the city, which is, whereas yes, we're approving nearly a $300 million budget, but those are one-time deals. It'd be interesting to see what it would look like to not have those one-time deals. And I'm not advocating for not having those. Those are all phenomenal projects. And I don't think we will ever not have these projects, because once these get done, then it's going to be infrastructure on the sewer system and water treatment plants and so on. You're always going to have these one big-time projects, I guess. But when you look at, operations for the nuts and bolts of $210, $217 million. How does that compare with other municipalities that are our size or potentially bigger or smaller compared to us?
It's a great question. I would say that if you looked at other municipalities, and I'm going to back up to when we talk about the general fund specifically. I think you're probably going to see something that is very consistent with this. In the general fund, your greatest expense is going to be in personnel, so on page 13. Your operating services are going to end up being about 20%. Your capital falls to a relatively small portion because of how it's mapped out. In terms of dollar per dollar, how do we compare it to a Haines City or a Lake Wales or a Lakeland? You know, I can tell you that in personnel side, we measure up. We evaluate and benchmark against a multitude of cities when it comes to what are our rates of pay. We never want to be at the very bottom of that. You never want to be so far above it that it's, you know, you're on that bleeding edge. You want to be competitive. We look at that constantly. I was just looking at it this morning from a number of cities on specific positions to make sure that we're in that market. Where you'll see fluctuations may be in the number of positions they have, the types of services they provide. Are they providing an affordable housing element in the same regard that we are? What is their reinvestment into roadways? I can tell you, I just drove back from Ocala this morning and going through some of the small towns of Marion and Lake County and seeing roads that are still dirt roads and gravel roads and poorly maintained shouldered roads. No, they're not making the same investment into their transportation infrastructure. So I can't really say, you know, dollar for dollar. I think that the way that we operate is extremely efficient. I think we're very lean. We maximize our technological resources in every way possible to make sure we're providing the highest level of service without putting an additional demand on people. You know, that's where you have a continual carrying cost is within people. Although you've got to expand based upon what your growth is. So I think there's so many variables within that. Do I think it's that, you know, dollar for dollar, we're consistent with what every other city is? I think that's comparing apples to oranges to bananas. But I would say that I, with great confidence, present this budget having been scrubbed. This is something I didn't say within the presentation, and your question just kind of made me think of it. This isn't what everybody asked for. You know, this is a $296 million budget. There's $9 million worth of stuff laying on the cutting room floor. So that's additional positions, that's additional toys and tools and programs and things like that that, you know, hey, that'd be great to have. But we have an accountability to the taxpayer at the end of the day. The other thing I'll say is that a lot of times people want to compare us to places like Lakeland. We are the second largest city in Polk County. Lakeland also has an electric utility that provides a substantial amount of money into their general fund as one of those dividends like we have from our utility. But that offsets a huge expense that you would otherwise have to make up through ad valorem or other revenues. So we can pull some numbers if you give us a little bit of time. We'd be happy to do that maybe when we bring the budget back in September. Our CFO and her team can certainly look at what some other budgets are through their points of contact and some cities of comparable size. What do the numbers look like? There is a lot of variables within it, though.
And I don't want to govern to headlines. You should never, ever do that. But I think it's just important to put that forth in, it's not really a $300 million budget. It's a $300 million budget because of the capital infusion projects
You have $100 million worth
Right.
of capital close to it just within your general fund. You have 17 million in transportation improvements, $69 million within infrastructure improvements, and then if you add in all of the capital expenses, vehicles, fire trucks, those types of things that are within, you're probably close to $100 million in capital. Keep in mind, so that $300 million includes $80 million in your utility operations. I guarantee you, and I'll bring it back to you in August, that the percent that goes into capital within utilities is greater than anywhere else in the organization. It's where the most capital-intense operations are. So, at the end of the day, operations and personnel throughout the entire system, you can see about 49% are in personnel and operating services, about 45% is in capital. So of that $300 million budget, let's say 160 million of it is in personnel and operating, and about 140 of it's probably in capital.
The road projects list that was on here, there wasn't anything specific to the North Lake Ship project, which we've received some support from the federal level on that project, but it would appear like we're going to have to put some more skin in the game than what we would really like to, even though that's a roadway that helps connect surrounding municipalities. Should there be a line item for that project, or is it better to kind of hold off on that particular project and, potentially look at your, larger than needed reserve and pull from there in the event that you needed to add funds to get that project completed? Because what I don't want to have happen is that project be 10, 15 years out. It's a project that needs to happen sooner than later.
So I'll ask MJ Carnevale to give you an update on where that project is, and then I'll comment on the.
Yeah, so so it wasn't listed in the transportation fund for construction, but there are design dollars built in within the budget to work on actually doing the design work for that road, and we're working to get that started right now. We don't think we'd actually see some of that funding. For example, the last round of funding that we got for South Lake Howard Drive West, we are just getting through the agreement processes on all of that now. So we won't, we've included that in next year's budget. So I think the reality is, if we look at construction and even starting construction, that would be in the following year's budget. That's why it's not shown in here. But it is something we're tracking and accounting for and building money towards.
We're gratefully appreciative of what has happened with our federal funds that come towards our projects. We have the West Lake Howard pedestrian improvements. That's an appropriation or a community congressional project that was sponsored by Congressman Soto. Lake Ship, that's with Congressman Franklin. We're going to continue to pursue efforts on that one, certainly. But the one we got from Soto, we are just now getting to the point of paperwork, getting ready to authorize us to move forward. It's been 2-3 years.
Year and a half.
Year and a half?
And we're just getting design started right now.
And so part of the problem in the CRA Downtown Advisory Committee just talked about this Monday night. Challenge is, in looking at like any grant program, the number you get for the project and when the money comes available, the things that can happen just in 3 months. Well, in 2 years, what happens with costs? Those things continue to go higher and higher and higher. And so that's the challenge we have with that. That's a project that has a stormwater component to it. It has a utility component to it. It has a transportation component to it. So when we look at how do you fund the delta of what you have, what the total project cost is in comparison to what the federal appropriation would be, we look to all three of those unique funds to help offset some of what that expense would be. Utilities should pay for the utilities, storm should pay for the storm, transportation should pay for the transportation, and we leverage all of those, and we look to the general fund balance and say, hey, we need some money to offset that. Again, God God forbid I ever go to another city to work that doesn't have that type of approach to it, because I don't know that I could go back to the dark ages of saying, okay, we got to shake the couch cushions to find the contingency for a project. You all have very well-established fund balance that gives you some latitude on how to tackle some of those challenges, because they are inevitable. If you bid a project today, if I give you a dollar amount today for a project and you bid it in 6 months, the price I gave you to do it is not going to be enough. It will change that quickly.
I think as everybody up here just wants projects to happen so much faster than they do, and that's, I get it, that's the government world, and there's not a lot that we can do to change that or modify it, but I think the folks that we have running our day-to-day operations in the city of Winter Haven do expedite these things as quickly as physically possible, and so I'm appreciative of that. The last question I've got is kind of in line to Commissioner Dantzler's comments on filling the big boxes. So I'll mention the Winter Haven EDC, which Mr. Lyons is here tonight. Is that an arm that we should be looking to them? They've done a phenomenal job in bringing new development and new industry out to the intermodal facility, and the projects that are happening are second to none anywhere in the country. But is that potentially an arm of the EDC that we should look towards to try to recruit some of these larger retailers into the big boxes that we have available in and around our area?
I don't want to speak for Bruce, but I certainly think that would be somebody you want at the table, and if they could help leverage that. They are more engaged in that type of recruitment in response to letters of interest, or the folks that are going out and doing site selection on industrial parks. It's not too awful different on the commercial retail side, so that would be something we'd have to explore with them. But I think that's because you're talking about economic development at the end of the day. It's not just about the services that, I'll say, and this is not to be disparaging in any way, what a Main Street provides to a business and what a chamber provides to a business is different from what an economic development side, of greasing the wheels and navigating the path to help them come in for a safe landing on a project, and pulling together all the various partners that need to be there. That's certainly something that Bruce is expert in, and we could certainly give some consideration to that through further discussions. But I think Commissioner Dantzler's spot on. You've got some big boxes here. Retail has changed. It will continue to change. So what do you do with those spaces, and what level of retail, what type of retail has not changed that would like to be in those spaces? We've not engaged a whole lot in that because it's not our property to go out and promote and market. But I think that if we sit and wait for somebody else to do it, it's not going to happen.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say the budget was presented very well. It's put together very well. As far as every city, they're different. They're different in what they engage in. They're different in what they focus in. They're different with strategic plans, and that's what makes them different. And that's why you're not going to be able to compare in a way that you could draw conclusions from some sort of what they do better or you do better. So, but I did kind of look at the total general fund with all the revenues, and then I looked at our, I guess you would say, I'm looking for the chart now, kind of moved away from it. That showed the percentage, how much was operational, and then the percentage of our funds that are over that. But when I looked at and divided it, 72 million, and that included a lot of general fund revenues, that just not ad valorem taxes. And so if you had to operate in an emergency for 3 months without any revenues, you would be at about 18 million of that. So we would have a little cushion that we could go operate a little bit longer, and with this hurricane season coming up, and they anticipate more hurricanes, and they've predicted and whatever, and the I guess you'd say the intensity of those, they've increased those. So just curious about the funding that we would have in case something did happen and we had to operate without revenues. Because if you've been through a hurricane, as Charlie, Francis, and Jean, you never come back. You don't get back a lot of the revenues, ad valorem revenues. There's some of that you don't really recoup for a long period of time. Some of it you never do. We're lucky with the growth we have, but you don't know what kind of, how they would be affected either with some of those homes, I guess you'd say. So I think any excess that we have in that area is good because it keeps any funding for bonds and things. It gives you a better rating and everything on that. So hopefully we don't have to use it.
Commissioner Mercer, if I could just respond to that. So at $18 million, for 3 months operations, at 30%, city sits at about 21, almost 22 million.
Right.
You do have the luxury of hopefully getting money back through FEMA, but as you well know, that is a very lengthy process. You may not see that money back into your coffers for a year plus, maybe 2 years. So you're having to draw down reserves and hope that you're going to replenish them. But as you said, you never fully will. I had just read an article in the past, I'm going to say 3 or 4 days, about another city that had, they were looking for 45 to 60 days of fund reserves to be able to operate. And I remember thinking, wow, that's a short period of time. If you were in a peninsular state like Florida and you had a hurricane season that was active, 45 days, you haven't even finished picking up the sticks from the day one that the storm came through.
The one, I would say this for Charlie, Francis, and Jean, I did all of the FEMA work on that, getting those in. And I was still, a year later, still turning in the paperwork on some of those claims. So you know, that's just filing the paperwork.
I got an email from the Florida FEMA operations yesterday that ties back to impacts from Hurricane Ian. So,
It's a slow
Anything
process.
else?
No, that's it.
Reverend Dawson, you have anything?
You indicated that we're in negotiations with the fire and police, is that correct?
yes, sir.
And I don't know what the anticipated outcome that would be, the impact that may have, if any, or anything, if there's any significance on your projections that you,
I'm sorry, I can barely hear you, sir.
think I'm at home, excuse me. I said that whether or not there will be any impact relative to your budget, depending on what the outcome of those negotiations.
That's, it remains to be seen. So I mentioned that the police department will have our employees, members that are represented through the police collective bargaining agreement will have a vote at the end of this month based upon what we had proposed. And if that's successful, then that has no impact on it. If it's not, then we're right back to where we were. In the fire side, I don't know where that will land. So we budgeted it just to put a placeholder in there. I can't just not do anything and then hope that we land somewhere and can cover it. If it goes up, then I've got to make some adjustments within the budget to accommodate what that additional increase would be. That could be tapping initially into reserves to do something there, or looking at where we have cash carry forward to offset, because we will have likely some cash carry forward that we'll have to manage coming out of fiscal year '24. If it's less, then that's more money that goes into a fund balance for emergency needs. So like I said, hopefully we'll know within the next probably 3 weeks where we are with the police department, and we'll be back to the table with the fire department going forward and continue to negotiate in good faith with them to come to some resolution.
With the CRA becoming, hopefully being more proactive as it relates to Some of the vacant land has been mentioned. Some of it has been for years, particularly in the Florence Villa area. And I think taking that proactive approach will serve that area much better as one of the portals coming into the city. I think that it certainly needs or deserves the attention. I know that there is some movement. We're seeing some of that with some of the properties. There are incentives, if you will, because of the cost of land. And interest, of course, is increased significantly, even in areas that perhaps were not as attractive or sought after. So I think now, most things are now in play, if you will. So there may be more incentive now for, as we proactively look at who the owners are of the properties and trying to cobble those together so that it can be a meaningful, someone could put a meaningful project or effort on there. You know, we just sold on Martin Luther King, the old Salvation Army. And that went pretty quick, to say the least. Now, of course, where it's located, and I think it went for a pretty good price. So, you know, I don't know, we don't have any properties, any lands. We have a lot of vacant land, but really no properties that are necessarily available. People are looking for properties, or individuals looking for places for business opportunities, and they just do not exist. There have been many strategic plans that looked at that area and thought that perhaps, like with Dutney and other enterprises, that perhaps could be, realized in that area as well. So maybe that may be the approach we'll have to consider, and I think the CRA will be probably the engine that will help drive that.
I got one more question, Mayor, before you move on. I'm trying to get comfortable with the percentage of debt that we have, and I know when we first had our meetings, I was complimentary about our debt service but Commissioner Yates brought up a good idea of a $300 million budget. Probably $100 million of that is special projects or construction funds. I'm trying to get, and CJ, you may have to come up with this answer, but on page 9, it looks like debt service is 3.7%, and then when you go to page 13, looks like debt service is 8%. I guess what I'm trying to get to is, where are we in terms of percentage of debt in our budget? Not, special projects notwithstanding. What would you think, CJ? Can you pull that out of thin air, or is it going to take some time?
So I'm not sure what you're asking. Like
Well,
the
I'm looking for
dollar?
bond, servicing all these bonds that we've got outstanding. How much, what I'm grappling for is, the national debt, for example, they've been able to equate it, it's $42,000 per citizen we're responsible for the national debt and the interest on the debt. And if I remember the first time that we met over here in the conference room, I think our debt level was under 10%. But I don't know if that was on a $300 million budget or on a $200 million budget. Do you remember that conversation that we had? And I complimented you. I'm just trying to make sure our debt service is under 10% of our budget, and I'd prefer it to be under 5, but I don't know where that number is. You know what I'm trying to get to?
And I know when we have to do the bond disclosure, we have to report that, but we added new debt, so I don't want to talk off the top of my head, but I will get that to you.
Okay, if you don't mind, I just want to know where we are. Again, like Commissioner Yates said, not special projects notwithstanding, talking about ongoing budget stuff. What's our ongoing debt service against our ongoing budget?
Are you talking about total balance of debt or total monthly debt?
Total balance of debt,
Okay.
percentage-wise.
That's what I thought you were getting at.
Yep.
Okay.
Total balance. That's it.
Anyone else? Well, my final comment will be that, to the staff, Chief, this is what I think is a very forward budget. And I'm going back to what you said. You know, I hadn't thought about that until you mentioned it. And then I thought about it. You know what my first budget was? A little less than 70 million. That was the total budget for the city of Winter Haven. Less than 70 million. And so, I mean,
Sounds like we're talking about when I bought my first car.
we've come a long way.
Stand for a nickel.
And you know what else, Brad? I remember your first budget. And the famous saying, we don't need to kick the can down the road. You remember that?
Talked about that quite a bit.
I think we have copies of every budget that was ever passed in our finance library. So maybe for one of the upcoming meetings, we'll see if we can dig up the inaugural years of commissioners and bring those budgets so you can reflect.
I just want to put tonight in a perspective. Having been here for over 20 years, having seen the fund balance be not even half of what it is now, having gone through the downturn, having gone through the hurricanes, there has been one consistent thing with the city of Winter Haven. And that has been our staff and our management. We have been able to navigate whatever has been thrown after us. Whatever has been thrown after us. And to sit here tonight and look at a budget, it's really sort of blowing me right out the water from where we've come. And feeling reassured about everything that I've seen over the years, that we can withstand any major situations. I don't think that there's something that can be thrown at us that we would not be able to withstand. Now, maybe that's overconfidence, but in another sense of the word, it's strategically looking at where we've been and where we are now and what we have in place to keep us going. So, with that being said,
Mr. Mayor, can I make a final comment if that's permissible?
yes,
I just want to give some kudos to some people. So CJ Scott and Alan Weeks are responsible for crunching these numbers. Your department leadership team and all of their staff have worked on this budget since 10/1 of last year. There's never a time they are not working on a budget, and I can guarantee you that they've already submitted this one to me. They're working on the one for fiscal year '26. But you have an amazing finance department through and through. Katrina Hill and her team are who put this, all the finesse to this and this presentation to help communicate everything. And I'll tell you, I greatly appreciate your compliments about how we approach this budget. I will promise you this, it will only get better. If the strategic plan is adopted, that becomes a guiding principle for this, and you will see more of a fold-in of the strategic objectives that you have set will align exactly with what's in the budget. It does that today, but it would be very amateur and preemptive of us to try and make those assignments to strategic goals when the plan has yet to be adopted. But I can tell you that going forward, that will be the approach to your budget year over year. Thank you.
just an outstanding job, and so we really do appreciate it. So with that being said, I will adjourn this meeting. We will take a 10-minute recess. So we will come back at 7:23. Oh. call the agenda review for this, the 17th of July. We will have roll call.
Commissioner Dollison.
Here.
Commissioner Mercer.
Here.
Commissioner Dantzler.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Yates.
Still here.
And Mayor Birdsong.
Here. You're still here. All right, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we have, are we going to do this Water Professional Month proclamation, or are we going to just wait till Monday to do that?
We'll do that Monday evening.
All right, developments of note, none, minutes, we will take those up on Monday. Ordinances, second reading, 02434.
No changes to that
No
one?
changes?
No, Mr. Mayor, no, that's just the cash carry forward associated with reappropriation of encumbered expenses.
Okay, all right, and then we have the consent agenda.
So if you'd like, I can run through these fairly quickly with the assistance of the Deputy City Manager.
Yes, go
So the
ahead.
first item is the RFQ 2418. This is for the progressive design build of the water recycling facility at Pollard Road, as well as the wastewater treatment plant 2 abandonment. This is a project that, or an RFQ process that Commissioner Mercer was the liaison to. They had 3 submissions for this. Those were ranked by the Professional Services Committee, and they heard presentations on June 27th. Wharton Smith is who was recommended for award of that design build contract. So that would be to design, permit, and construct the new facility at Pollard Road, as well as the abandonment of Plant 2. This has been posted, and there were no protests. So this is just to negotiate a contract, and then we'll bring back actual scope and task orders associated with that project. This is not a project you're going to do all at once. You're going to take bites at this over time, because this is a massive effort, very, very expensive within the utility system. It's part of their 5-year capital program. So, and it will involve retrofitting and refurbishing some of the existing system, but also expanding it to account for growth, as well as that Plant 2 abandonment. Item 10B, this is tied back to, if you remember, we had a couple incidents involving some problems at our wastewater treatment plants, both at Plant 2 and at Plant 3, going back, I'll say, over the past 18 months, 2 years, as well as a number of sanitary spills that were tied to hurricane activity. When you have those things, you must report them to the DEP, and they track all that. In this case, despite even the fact that these are, in the case of hurricane overflows, those are beyond our control, you still get, I'll say, dinged for that. So the city got a consent order from DEP. The nice thing about when you get a consent order, it is to, really, it's a, for lack of a better word, it's a penalty, because you had a system failure regardless of what the cause was. But DEP does provide you an opportunity to do an in-kind type project versus just paying a penalty fee to them. So we had submitted to them a project in which we would purchase a bypass pump in the amount of $78,727. This far exceeds what we need to do to meet the DEP consent order, but at the same time, it does give us a resource to address future spills and mitigate those issues. So.
All right.
Item 10C, this is a recommendation of award for a rebid of Lift Station 119. This lift station, AJ, if you can jump over to where the photo is, this is going to be on the shore of Lake Mirror, generally north of the connection between Mirror and Howard there. I can't see what street that is. It runs up to it, 16th Street, I believe it is, or 14th, 13th? 14th, okay. So this is a rebid. We did this in November of last year. We only got one bid that came in, and it exceeded what the engineer's estimate was, so we rejected that. We reposted. We received 2 bids on the rebid, and B&B Construction was the lowest responsive bidder, and it was within line of the engineer's estimate of construction. So this is a recommendation to award the rehabilitation of Lift Station 119 at a cost of $989,470 for B&B Construction.
All right.
Moving on, so there are, these next three all kind of go together. This is tied to grant programs through the Florida Department of Environmental Protection. We're going to talk about three different grant portals that they have. These are grants that we have submitted, so this is somewhat of a retroactive request for approval. We had to meet a submittal deadline of July 15th in submitting these. The first group of programs fall within the, the Protecting Florida Together program. So these are projects that were identified through the Alternative Water Supply Grant Portal. So again, dealing specifically with alternative water supply. Mayor, you're very familiar with that through the PRWC. Three projects. One is a direct potable recharge mobile unit. This is somewhat of an educational tool to help promote the future of direct potable reuse. That is a grant request of $1.3 million. The Pollard Road Water Production Facility. This is a water plant and also the receiving point for PRWC water that will come into Winter Haven. That is a request for a $3.9 million grant. And then the Bradco Transmission and Treatment Project. This has to do with the bringing water to Bradco for rehydration purposes there. That is a $25 million grant. These would require 50% match from the city, and that would be factored into, it's already included in your CIP. We've had some briefings with you about the CIP for utilities over the past month or so. You may recall our Water Director Gary Hubbard said that our rates and everything that we're considering are based upon 5% grant receipts. This is a very aggressive approach to far exceed the 5%. We may not get all these grants, but you don't get them if you don't ask.
If you don't ask.
And by asking, you find out what do they like about a project, what do they not like, what do you need to do for a resubmittal, and if nothing else, it gets these projects on the radar screen of DEP.
Yes.
The second group are going to be water quality improvement grant authorization. So again, same thing, asking for retroactive ratification of these submittals we did. These are the Water Quality Improvement Grant Program, the Water Resource Facility at Pollard Road. This is that wastewater treatment plant project. We're submitting a grant for $79 million. That's half of the cost of that project in our initial phases of it. And then $3.4 million for the septic to sewer remediation area of 6A. That's going to be on the eastern side of Lake Hartridge. This has come before the commission a few times in the past. This is one of our priority areas for getting folks off of septic. So these would be submitted, again, $79+ million for wastewater treatment plant 3, $3.4 million for septic to sewer. And then the last category or portal within this Protecting Florida Together grant effort is for wetlands restoration and protection grant authorization. And in this case, this is a request for $5 million in grant funds to further expand the land that is available within the Bradco project. There's some additional lands to the north that are been explored through the entity that we are doing some public-private partnership work with, and so that would be to help fund the acquisition of that land. The next item on your agenda is the Planning Commission membership. As you recall, you appointed 2 individuals at your last meeting. One of those members, I believe, but I will confirm, has since withdrawn from consideration for that due to some other conflicts, not of being on the commission, but time restrictions that they are anticipating will come their way. But we are recommending the appointment of Kevin Tyson to seat 1. This was the one remaining seat, and likely we will be bringing back another recommendation at some point, and I'll look to Eric. They will consider further applicants to fill the other remaining seat.
Okay.
And then after that, you have travel and training for the mayor to go on behalf of the Central Florida Regional Planning Council to the Florida Regional Councils Association Policy Board meeting in early August in St. Petersburg, Florida. I'm going to ask Deputy City Manager to present the final two for 10I and 10J.
Good evening, Mayor and City Commissioners. So this is the Trail Go. It's a brand-new grant from the Florida and Greenway and Trails Office. It's an opportunity through that office for the city to get some grant funding to help improve the Chain of Lakes Trail. So staff is working to pursue the full grant amount, which is $200,000. The goal would be to use that to give that trail a facelift, and then also invest in some equipment that'll help with ongoing maintenance there. So the grant window opens August 1st, and this is a first-come, first-served grant, so we want to make sure that we are first in the door if possible. And so this is just seeking authorization to apply and take any additional action necessary. I also want to point out, Katie White, who recently joined our team, if you throw your hand up there, Katie. She's working with Andy Palmer to deliver capital projects within the Parks, Recreation, and Culture arena. She was instrumental in preparing this application and actually comes to the city team from the Office of Greenways and Trails. We hired her away from there. She has worked very closely with our staff on a number of things over the years, including our Trail Town designation, and just really brings a lot of experience with her. She's local to Polk County. She did her undergraduate studies at FSU, for those of you that interests, and her graduate work at Trinity College in Dublin, and just brings a ton of really cool experience with her, and we're excited to have her on the team. Item 10J is an award of RFQ 2424 for urban forest planting, maintenance, and removal services. So last fall, you'll recall, the city adopted its first ever comprehensive urban forest management plan, and earlier this year, we were awarded Inflation Reduction Act funding for a grant we applied for with that match that dedicates about $695,000 over 5 years to invest in the urban forest. RFQ 2424 was advertised to procure local expertise in pruning, removal, and maybe most importantly, planting, Commissioner Dantzler. 4 organizations submitted bids, and the review committee recommended selection of the top 3, all who have slightly different expertise. Those 3 contractors are Evolve Contracting Incorporated, Summerall's Environmental, the Tree Lady Company, and Commissioner Dantzler served as the liaison for that. And staff is recommending moving forward with 5-year continuing contracts with all 3 firms, and then issuing specific task orders for work underneath that, again, focused on pruning, planting, and removals where needed.
Okay, all right, thank you. All right, then we have resolutions, and so the first resolution, the strategic plan, we don't need to review that again. Rescheduling of the city commission meeting from Labor Day, we'll take care of that. So then.
Actually, that's not, just, sorry, don't mean to correct, but that is tied to the rescheduling, so we don't conflict with the Board of County Commissioners.
Board of County
Yes.
Commissioners. Okay, that's fine. All right, so then new business.
New business, this is the trim notice. I'm going to ask CJ, as our CFO, who's put all this together, to just comment on this briefly.
Yeah, so the city's required to set a proposed millage rate for the upcoming fiscal year per truth and millage, also called trim. The city must notify the property appraiser of the rollback rate, the proposed millage rate, date, time, and location of the first public hearing by August 4th, 2024. The public hearing cannot be in conflict with the hearing dates for the BSCC and Polk County School. The first public hearing is proposed for Tuesday, September 10th. The second public hearing will be held at the regularly scheduled September 23rd meeting. The gross taxable value is $4,745,881,925. I know. That's an increase of 11.26% over prior year. The proposed fiscal year 25 budget was constructed with a millage rate of 6.59 mils, consistent with the prior year's millage rate. At a 96.50 collection rate, along with funding of the CRA, the anticipated ad valorem is $27,793,715. The rolled back rate is the millage rate that would produce the same amount that ad valorem levied during the prior year, exclusive of new construction, additions, and boundary changes. The calculated rollback rate for fiscal year 2025 is 6.2912. Because the current rate of 6.59 mils exceeds the rollback rate, the millage rate must be advertised as a tax increase. And that's just, those are the rules. So the recommendation is establish the fiscal year 2025 tentative millage rate at 6.59 mils and set the first budget public hearing on Tuesday, September 10th, 2024 at 6 p.m.
All right, thank you. Any questions? No? All right, the final things are, what we got here? Let me look at my agenda. I think we can just adjourn, right?
Mr. Mayor, I just want to mention one thing, if we can, from the city manager's office, just to let the commission know that I will be out of the office beginning Tuesday, so following this meeting, Tuesday, the 23rd, through Monday, August 5th.
23rd.
And Deputy City Manager MJ Carnavale will be point on all items. I will not be available via phone or otherwise.
Okay. All right. Anyone else would like to report anything tonight? If not, motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We adjourn.